Hello and welcome to Redpill Rundown. From time to time I like to intentionally read and cover controversial subjects, and my last quick rundown was just about the most controversial book I could think of. I recently finished reading a book by another controversial author, although considerably more well-mannered, and that is the book If We Do Nothing by Jared Taylor, an advocate of European civil rights and voluntary association. Rather hear a summary than actually read? No worries, because here's your quick rundown on If We Do Nothing. This book is actually a collection of Mr. Taylor's writings made over decades of political activism and identitarian advocacy. The book is divided into 5 sections: basic principles, history, current events, a different perspective, and speaking personally. In the first section, Mr. Taylor advocates for the benefits of Western civilization, that diverse societies tend to have more strife than strength, including a significant decrease in trust among multicultural communities, and a review of a book by Barbara Oakley of Oxford University called Pathological Altruism, and how it pertains to the real world. To put it simply, pathological altruism is when a person or group of people becomes so supposedly altruistic they hurt themselves or others in an attempt to help those they deem disenfranchised. To quote, "an unhealthy focus on others to the detriment of one's own needs." A basic example of this would be someone that is so generous to the poor he gives away all his possessions and money until he is no longer able to work and gain income, and therefore in the long run becoming unable to help others or even himself. A more practical example would be Sweden taking in large amounts of unvetted migrants from North Africa as a show of altruism, to the point where the native Swedish people suffer, while the migrants are now in a climate they are genetically unsuited for, in a country with a culture and language foreign to their own, with their own home countries becoming worse off due to brain drain. In the end of the section, Mr. Taylor recommends that any country's native people look out for their own continued existence, whether that be the Japanese in Japan or the Hungarians in Hungary. The second section is called History and covers a variety of historical subjects with different points of view. Mr. Taylor talks about the British Empire and how in some ways the sociological views on human biodiversity reflects the modern Western norms, including variances on views by how close or far one was to a diverse location. He also goes into some interesting information on the background of the famous Brown v. Board court decision, as one of the first examples of what could be called by some as judicial activism in the United States Supreme Court. There was a particularly heavy leaning on one study with the results taken out of context to suit the agenda, improper connections between one of the parties and one of the judges throughout the process, and the result has not been very flattering as far as American public education is concerned. Mr. Taylor also discusses the rumors of fraternization between Thomas Jefferson and a mistress, and how the stronger case can and should be made that Jefferson's younger and wilder brother is the more likely culprit for illegitimate offspring. Lastly for this section, Mr. Taylor reviews a book covering the history of Africa's post-colonialization, the original book having a very self-explanatory title, The Fate of Africa, From the Hopes of Freedom to the Heart of Despair, which goes into unfortunate detail on how even the best and most capable leaders in post-colonial Africa, such as Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, succumbed to political corruption and horrid economic policy in the form of what amounts to a dictatorship, leading to eventual involuntary departure from office. The third section is titled Current Events, and it is important to note this book was released in 2017, 2 years prior to the making of this video. In it, Mr. Taylor discusses the rather tribalistic results of Hurricane Katrina, including actions taken by and against emergency medical workers and the National Guard, as well as improvisations made by Australian and British tourists. He also writes about the lack of honest biological discussions in the United States, including large, but largely ignored, situations in many American prisons and a review of a Human Rights Watch report called No Escape. Mr. Taylor also speaks to the blaming of the justice system for the behavior of its criminals, and the lack of integration with the rise of non-Western immigration in both the United States and also in European nations such as France and Germany. In the fourth section, A Different Perspective, Mr. Taylor offers just that on a variety of subjects and events. He speaks to the very interesting behind the scenes of the civil rights movement, from Rosa Parks to the family of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the noble fiction that everyone is equal in everything regardless of genetic traits, a critique on American conservatism and how it conserves nothing, comments on women in combat, including an interesting commentary from a servicewoman on the logistical and psychological ramifications, and some words on modern Western journalism and how many are made to conform to the status quo. The final section is Speaking Personally, and Mr. Taylor states how he is not a fan of the Super Bowl, how he is a fan of author Anthony Trollope, how the English language changes over time, the Civil War and how it affects the current state of American Southern patriotism, and some words regarding fallen comrades. If any of this sounds interesting, I recommend checking out the book, as any more detail crammed into this, and it wouldn't be a quick rundown at all. Anyways, that's your quick rundown. Links in the description. See you guys later.